Tonight's mystery opens with a whisper in the dark and a secret that refuses to stay buried. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the case that nearly killed Archie. The trouble began with a phone call that sounded like Manhattan itself was trying to whisper with a slit throat. I'd been finishing a memo for Wolfe, one he'd ignore until the sun froze, when the phone on my desk gave a short, strangled buzz that didn't sound like anything in the civilized world. It was 10:45 p.m., the hour when most respectable citizens of our fair city are in bed and the rest are busy regretting choices they'll deny in daylight. The brownstone was quiet except for the radiator clicking its arthritic protest and a distant clink from the kitchen where Fritz was polishing silver like it had insulted Switzerland. I picked up the receiver with all the enthusiasm of a man expecting a wrong number from Jersey. "Nero Wolfe's residence," I said. "Archie Goodwin speaking. State your business or your recipe." What came back wasn't a voice so much as a shiver wrapped in static. Listen, the Heron driver is next. He's—" The line broke into a scrape, something falling, then a muffled gasp. There was the unmistakable thud of a receiver hitting the floor, followed by a sound no healthy body makes. "Hey, who's there? Speak up," I barked, but the only answer was an empty hum, like the city had swallowed the caller whole. I hung up, grabbed my coat, and took 3 long strides toward the dining room. Wolfe was finishing what he calls his evening beer contemplation, which is a fancy phrase meaning he stares at a glass like it owes him money. When I barged in, he glared as though I were suggesting he plant tulips in his chair cushions. "Good heavens, Archie," he rumbled, setting the glass down with priestly annoyance. "Must you erupt?" "A man just called," I said. "Couldn't get his name. He said the Heron driver is next." Then something happened. Something bad. Wolfe's brows knitted the way they do when he's trying to decide whether to be irritated or worried. "The Heron," he said slowly, "refers, I presume, to my automobile." "Unless there's another oversized man in Manhattan who rides in one," I said. "And if there is, I hope he's paying you royalties." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered, but it didn't have its usual sting. He leaned forward with an uncharacteristic sharpness. "Describe the voice." Male, terrified, possibly injured, sounded like he was calling from a construction site being eaten by hyenas. Across the room, Fritz appeared silently in the doorway, silver tray in hand, eyebrows raised like the Alps. Wolfe waved him off. Fritz, recognizing the tone that meant crime is afoot, vanished without a word, because Fritz almost never intrudes on business, rarely answers the door, and certainly never lifts anything heavier than a carving knife for investigation. Wolfe fixed me with that steady, heavy stare. "Archie, you will not go blundering into danger on the strength of a single incoherent telephone call." "Sure," I said, "absolutely, right after I check where the call came from." His jaw tightened. "Archie," but I was already halfway to the hall closet. "Tracing it, not chasing it. There's a difference. The distinction is semantic. Well, semantics are what keep this agency solvent." I jammed my arms into my coat. "Be right back." "Archie." His voice stopped me cold, soft, low, and carrying more weight than his chair. "Be careful." For a man who can silence a room with a sigh, that was practically a hug. I gave him half a grin to show I'd heard, then hit the sidewalk. Finding the source of the call wasn't hard. The operator owed me a favor after I'd once talked her ex-boyfriend out of throwing a jukebox at a bartender. She traced the incoming line to a vintage auto garage 6 blocks into Midtown, Renoir Custom Motors, known among the chrome-loving elite as the place to get your European imports pampered, tuned, or rebuilt from scrap. The Renoir brothers had reputations carved out of equal parts genius and grease. When I reached the garage, the place was as dark as a tax collector's conscience. A faint smell of gasoline hung in the air, oily and heavy, the way garages always smell right before something explodes in your face. I tested the door, unlocked. Either the Renoir were unusually trusting, or someone had rearranged the lock with a crowbar. Inside, the shadows were stacked wall-high. A single lamp flickered over a half-disassembled Jaguar, throwing long steel bones across the floor. I took a few steps, letting my eyes adjust. A wrench clattered somewhere ahead. "Hello?" I called. "Anybody need a hand? I left my cape at home, but I can improvise." Silence. Then I saw it. a shape under the engine hoist. At first I thought it was a tarp. Then the tarp breathed. I rushed forward. A man lay pinned beneath the collapsed hoist, his legs twisted under a ton of machinery, and his face smeared with grease and blood. His breaths were thin threads slipping away with each second. I knelt beside him, lifting the metal just enough to shift his weight. "Easy," I said. "Stay with me. Who called? What happened?" His eyes fluttered like he was trying to focus on Manhattan through fog. His lips moved. All that came out was a rough whisper. "Tell him, Jack." "Jack who? Jack what?" I leaned closer, but whatever engine had driven his life chose that moment to shut down for good. His head sagged. I checked his pockets, not touching anything that would count as evidence. Wolfe always says my curiosity will be the death of both of us. He might be right, but discipline is discipline. That's when I noticed his right hand clenched around something. I pried his fingers gently apart. A playing card slipped out, its back smeared with a line of dark grease. The Jack of Spades, a nice subtle calling card if you happen to be a melodramatic murderer or a bridge player with homicidal tendencies. I stood, scanned the dim garage again. Whoever had done this was gone. The place held its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. Instead, I made the smart move. I went to the front, found the phone, and called the police. Kramer would show up with his cigar and his procedural gospel, and I'd get 3 lectures about Goodwin's grandstanding, but a dead man deserves official eyes. Sirens grew louder, bouncing off the alley walls. I stepped outside to wait. As the first squad car screeched in, I looked back at the dark doorway of the garage. A man had died there, clutching a card like a gambler holding his last hand. And someone had made sure he said the Heron driver was next. I didn't know yet whether that meant Wolfe, me, or the car, but I did know one thing. The night had just stopped being ordinary. I've waited around plenty of crime scenes in my time, alleyways where the rats had tenancy rights, penthouses where the carpets cost more than my yearly salary, and once on a fire escape that wobbled every time someone below me sneezed. But there was something especially grim about standing in that darkened auto garage with steam hissing from a ruptured radiator, like the place had sprung a leak in hell's plumbing. The NYPD sirens had faded, replaced by the clatter of uniforms and the low grind of city life beyond the half-open bay door. The chrome of half-assembled cars caught the thin light and threw back crooked reflections, like the room was full of metallic ghosts shrugging at the mess. I kept my hands in plain view because Kramer hates arriving to find me bent over a corpse. Not that it changes how he talks to me, but it's the thought that counts. Pearly Stebbins lumbered in first, hunched shoulders bulldozing the air ahead of him. He sniffed like the garage offended him personally. "You again," he growled. "One day you're going to walk into a place, and it'll be your turn on the floor." "Pearly," I said, "if I'm ever on a garage floor, it'll be because a carburetor insulted my dancing, and I took a swing at it." He grunted, which is Stebbins for conceding the point. He trudged toward the body under the hoist, muttering about paperwork. Inspector Kramer followed, and he didn't storm in or explode or accuse me of hiding the Brooklyn Bridge in my pocket. He just walked in like a man who'd been dragged through too many hours and too many false alarms. His fedora was missing, left behind in the squad car probably, and the absence made him look vaguely undressed. He took in the room with one sweep, lips tight around the stub of an unlit cigar. "All right, Goodwin," he said, voice gravelly but not hostile. "What have we got?" "A dead man," I said. "He was alive long enough to call the brownstone, or somebody in this garage called. Hard to tell from the phone's last gasp." Kramer looked at me sideways. "You call this in fast, I'll give you that." That was practically a bouquet of roses coming from him. "I do what I can to brighten your evenings." He ignored that. "Why'd he call Wolfe? Why your place? Why not the precinct?" If he was aiming for a calm, soothing bedside manner, he picked the wrong pair of men, I said. "All I know is the call came from here." The voice was scared. He said something about the Heron driver being next. Kramer scratched his jaw, the cigar bobbing. "And you came down here alone? Should have waited for us." "Well," I said, "I didn't want Wolfe to come himself." That earned the faintest grunt of reluctant agreement. Even Kramer doesn't want Wolfe moving more than 10 feet without geological assistance. Stebbins bent over the dead man, muttering, "Name in the pocket, Leon Renoir." He peered closer at the hoist. This wasn't an accident. Pin bolts are sheared, not snapped. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Sabotage? Unless the bolts decided to go on strike, Stebbins said. I moved around the hoist to avoid trampling anything a DA might later point at. The place smelled of gasoline, hot metal, and something else, fear diluted over oil stains. My foot nudged something metallic on the ground, a lug nut or maybe a charm for mechanics with odd taste. Kramer stepped closer to the body. Cause of death looks like crushing trauma, but what I want to know... He broke off because Stebbins made a sound between a cough and a yelp. Inspector, look at this. Stebbins peeled back the edge of Leon Renoir's collar. Underneath, taped with a strip of black electrical tape, was a playing card, the 10 of spades. Kramer's exhale was sharp. Another one? He turned to me. You saw the one in his hand. I didn't touch it, I said quickly. I photographed it. I lifted my small personal camera, my own property, which is still allowed in the Constitution somewhere. The jack of spades, grease-smudged. Kramer didn't accuse me of lifting anything, which tells you exactly how tired he was. Playing cards, messages, cute, he snapped the cigar's end. This guy Leon into gambling? I shook my head. He was too busy not getting crushed by his equipment. Stebbins sniffed again. This ain't gambling, Inspector. Someone's sending a sequence. Kramer grimaced. I hate sequences. Try living with Wolfe, I said. He sequences everything except his grudges. Kramer ignored that. He knelt beside the body, carefully, because Kramer respects the dead even when they're inconvenient. He studied the tape. Someone wants us to read the cards. Jack of spades, then 10 of spades. He rose. Countdown? Code? Bridge lesson gone wrong, I said. Maybe the killer's trying to fix New York's terrible club strategies. Kramer shot me a look, but it didn't have heat. Goodwin, humor's fine, but don't dance too close to obstruction. I only obstruct bad manners, I said. He let that pass. Why'd Leon call Wolfe? Why the heron? I shrugged. Could be mistaken identity, could be deliberate, could be someone thought Wolfe's car mattered more than calling the cops. Kramer folded his arms. This the part where your boss decides he's involved. You know Wolfe, I said. If someone starts leaving playing cards on dying men who call his house, he'll consider that a personal invitation embroidered in lace. Kramer groaned softly. Fantastic. Then he hesitated, which was rare. Tell Wolfe not to make this harder. And if the killer keeps poking us, I asked. He rubbed his forehead. He won't stay out of it, he said finally. That's the spirit, I said. Stebbins interrupted by calling us over to an Alfa Romeo chassis. Look at this, he said. He pointed to a seam in the steel where the panelling had been sliced cleanly along the bottom edge, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Sabotage. Deep cut. Someone planned this. Could wreck the engine under pressure. Kramer whistled softly. Somebody had it in for the Renoir. Or for their customers, I offered. Somebody with a grudge against fancy European toys. Or someone after a specific car, Kramer added, looking up at me. Maybe the heron. That's Wolfe's, I reminded him. I'm aware, he said sharply, then softened. Look, Goodwin, I won't accuse Wolfe of sticking his nose where it doesn't belong, not tonight. That's appreciated, I said. But I will remind you, he continued, that this is a police matter, and if Wolfe decides to take the wheel, I'll need to know. A partnership, I mused. Next you'll ask us to share the beer. That will be the day, Kramer muttered. Stebbins straightened. Inspector, CSU is about 5 minutes out. Want me to secure the upstairs office? Yeah, Kramer said. Then to me, You staying? I've seen what I need, I said. And Wolfe is waiting. He studied me for a moment. Kramer's no psychic, but he reads the wind better than most. All right, Goodwin, he said gruffly. Tell Wolfe, not to make this harder. Then he added begrudgingly, because the universe must have owed me a favor, but keep me posted. That was his version of a handshake. I nodded, tipped an imaginary hat at Stebbins, and stepped out of the garage into the Manhattan night. The air was colder, with a bite that felt like a warning on the back of my neck. Playing cards. Sabotage. A dying man calling the brownstone. Wolfe wasn't going to like this, which meant, for better or worse, he'd be interested. And once Wolfe was interested, someone in this city, maybe several someones, was going to have a very bad week. Morning light in Wolfe's office has a way of making everything look more respectable than it deserves, including me. The sun comes in through the high windows in long, deliberate stripes that make the bookshelves glow like they were dusted with gold instead of my elbow grease. It also makes Wolfe look even more monumental than usual, which is impressive, considering he already resembled a small, stubborn mountain. When I walked in with my report, he was seated at his desk, eyes closed, fingers steepled, performing what he claims is thinking, but what I suspected might be dozing in an upright position. With Wolfe, the line is thin. I presume, he said without opening his eyes, that you are ready to disgorge the details. That's a charming mental picture for breakfast time, I said. Next time provide a paper bag. I sat, crossed my legs, and began the rundown of the previous night's festivities. Steam hissing from cracked radiator lines, a dying man crushed under a hoist, Stebbins sniffing like he expected to smell guilt before he saw it, and Kramer showing up without his hat, which I still considered the most baffling detail. Wolfe's only reaction for the first 5 minutes was a fractional tightening of the lips. He can express an entire opera with less movement than most men spend on a sneeze. When I got to the part about the 2 playing cards, the jack and the 10 of spades, he opened one eye. "Playing cards," he murmured. "Symbolic staging, intended communication, unserious theatrics." Symbolic communications often come with the fun bonus of homicide, I reminded him. And this one phoned us first. He grunted, which meant he agreed but didn't like agreeing. A deliberate taunt, he said. He wished to tether us to the matter. "Well," I said, "mission accomplished." And Kramer seemed oddly receptive. He didn't threaten to arrest me once, just told me to tell you not to make his life harder. "That is impossible," Wolfe said, opening his other eye. "My existence by its nature complicates his profession." He exhaled, slow and precise. "But it is of no matter. The moment someone invoked my automobile, we were engaged. The Heron, Wolfe's pride and joy, a vehicle he loves almost as much as he dislikes leaving the house." "I agree," I said, "which is why I assume the rest of my day will be spent doing penance for answering the phone." He ignored that. Wolfe stood slowly, like geography was rearranging itself around him, and walked to the Globe bar to pour himself water. It was before noon, so beer was off the table. He'd sooner speak Esperanto than break the rule of beer after noon. "Proceed," he said. I continued the report, describing the garage layout, the condition of Leon Renoir's body, and the sabotage Stebbins found. Wolfe listened with the air of a man auditing a badly written play. When I reached the part about Renoir's name, Wolfe nodded. "The Renoir brothers," he said. "Mediocre mechanics, but exceptional craftsmen. They restored my Heron engine 6 years ago." He lowered himself carefully back behind his desk. "High-value automobiles attract the same breed of men as art pieces and political leverage, those who wish to flaunt, those who wish to steal, and those who wish to destroy." "That's a cheerful assessment for the morning," I said. "Shall I open a window and let the joy out?" Wolfe ignored me and reached for the bell cord. Fritz appeared at the doorway within 30 seconds. He moves quietly for a man whose culinary talents could intimidate royalty. "Coffee for Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said, "and a fresh pot for me." Fritz nodded and vanished without a sound. I leaned back. "So," I said, "we're taking the case even though no client has officially hired us." "We have been hired," Wolfe said. "The killer has engaged us. It is intolerable to be taunted, Archie." "You're a sucker for flattery," I said, "even the homicidal kind." "Phooey," he said, but it didn't have much venom. "You will prepare a dossier on the Renoir brothers' clientele, socialites, importers, racers, collectors, anyone who would covet or envy their work." "That's a wide field," I said. "Plenty of egos, plenty of wallets." "Begin with the largest egos," Wolfe said. "They are invariably the most foolish." He paused, eyes narrowing. "And Archie, under no circumstances are you to get yourself put under machinery again." "Again?" I repeated. "That implies it happened once voluntarily." "You place yourself in situations that court calamity," Wolfe said, tone tight. "I will not indulge further recklessness." It took me a second to realize he was rattled. Wolfe doesn't rattle easily. I gave him a casual grin to smooth the moment. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll make sure machines keep their distance." "At your size," he muttered, "most machines are too wise to attempt it." Fritz returned with the coffee, placing cups on the table with a reverence usually reserved for relics. Wolfe inhaled deeply. I took mine black to keep the morning sharp. If I mentioned switching to milk, Wolfe would have called a physician, The phone rang at 10:52. Wolfe gestured sharply. I answered. Nero Wolfe's residence. Goodwin speaking. It's Saul, came the quiet voice. Saul Panzer rarely wastes breath. I've got early returns on your request. You might want to hear them. Tell me now, I said, but he cleared his throat slightly. Wolfe should hear too. I handed the phone to Wolfe. He pressed it to his ear like it was delivering scripture. After 2 minutes of murmurs, he hung up and closed his eyes again. Leon Renoir, he said, recently restored a Heron series engine identical to mine. Someone attempted to purchase it anonymously. Leon refused. There was disagreement. Ah, I said. So the Heron reference wasn't random. No, Wolfe said. It was purposeful. And we've got a suspect with money and no shame. Several, Wolfe said, but one in particular fits the profile. He opened a drawer, retrieved a cigar, not to smoke, but to roll between his fingers like a prop in a courtroom. Vander Chalk, I groaned. Oh, wonderful. The man whose ego has its own office address. A poser, Wolfe said, and a man who envies all things he cannot possess. He once tried to buy the Heron from you, I reminded him. You refused. He nearly had an embolism. His tantrum was excessive, Wolfe said mildly, and therefore suspicious. That's our red herring for the week, I said. He's too obvious. Perhaps, Wolfe admitted, but he warrants attention. Saul arrived at 11:21, slipping into the office with the smoothness of a man who learned silence from libraries. His flat cap was tucked under his arm. Morning, he said. I've done some digging. Proceed, Wolfe said. Saul handed over a neat stack of notes. Typed, minimal, efficient, very Saul. Leon Renoir had 3 current projects, a modified Jaguar for a society man, a restored Alpha chassis for a racing enthusiast, and a Heron series motor rebuilt from fragments. That last one caused trouble. Someone made an offer through an intermediary. Cash, no questions. Leon refused. Anonymous buyer, I said, meaning we can assume the worst. Buyer pushed hard, Saul said. Showed up in person once. Hooded, gloves, kept the meeting to 5 minutes. Leon told his sister it felt wrong. Did he describe the man? Wolfe asked. No, Saul said. Sister said Leon wouldn't talk about it. I whistled softly. If a Renoir won't talk about his client, that's practically a confession of danger. Saul nodded. And the Heron motor's still in the garage, untouched. Killer didn't take it. He didn't need to, I said. Not yet. Wolfe's lips thinned. This individual is weaving symbols. The Jack and 10 of spades signify escalation. The message is incomplete. I hate incomplete messages, I said. They always mean more work for me. Saul tucked his cap on. I'll keep at it, he said. There's more to find. Wolfe nodded approvingly. You are invaluable, Mr. Panzer. Glad to hear it, Saul said, deadpan. Then he left as silent as he came. I leaned back and stretched. Admit it, I said to Wolfe. You're worried. Pfui, he said, but the word didn't have the usual weight. Finish the dossier. I require it by lunch. I stood. You're becoming sentimental in your old age. Archie, he said sharply, go. I grinned and headed for my typewriter. If there's one thing Midtown does better than bleed your wallet dry, it's reflect sunlight at you in enough angles to make a man swear the city's trying to signal aircraft. By the time I reached the Renoir's showroom that afternoon, the glass facade was blazing so hard it looked like heaven had a branch office for imported cars. I wasn't there to admire chrome, but even I had to admit the place had style, a polished stage where wealthy people came to flaunt their desires on 4 wheels. I pushed through the glass door and got hit with the scent of wax, engine oil, and too much money. A clerk in a stiff suit looked like he had been trained to greet customers warmly, but had mislaid the instructions. Good afternoon, he said, uncertain whether he meant it. I'm here to see Claudette Renoir, I said. Her brother and I recently had a very unfortunate encounter with gravity. The clerk blinked. Miss Renoir is... But it didn't matter, because she was already striding toward me with all the force of a small, fashionable hurricane. Claudette Renoir was the kind of woman you saw once and remembered until something stronger knocked you unconscious. Her hair was dark and impeccably rolled. Her suit was powder blue to match the convertible parked outside, and her expression could have soured milk in 3 boroughs. She stopped 3 feet from me, chin lifted, eyes sharp enough to slice upholstery. "You," she said. No greeting, no niceties. "Why were you at my brother's garage last night?" "That's a long story," I said. "And you look like a woman who prefers short ones." "Don't joke with me." Her voice cracked on the last word, grief fraying the edges. "You were with him when he died." "I found him after the hoist fell," I said gently. "He called my employer's house. I went to check. If I could have gotten there 5 minutes sooner, he'd be asking the questions now." Her eyes softened a fraction, then hardened again. Grief and suspicion were wrestling for the steering wheel. "Come with me," she snapped. She led me out to the sidewalk where the sun bounced off her powder blue convertible like a spotlight. The car was immaculate, gleaming body, spotless chrome, tires that looked kissed by angels. It was the kind of vehicle men bought when they wanted to pretend they were 20 and dangerous. Claudette wasn't pretending. She slid into the driver's seat and waited for me to stand close enough for her to glare at without straining her neck. I leaned in slightly, making sure not to smudge anything that looked like it cost more than my typewriter. "I want the truth," she said. "All of it." "I've been told I'm incapable of anything else," I said. "Usually by people filing complaints." She almost smiled, then caught herself. "My brother, Leon, he was frightened. He didn't frighten easily." She laid her hand on the steering wheel, and that's when I saw it, a black smear on the leather. Not ordinary grime, garage-grade grease matching the stuff smeared on the jack of spades Leon had clutched. Her hand twitched, pulling away, too fast. "You've been busy," I said lightly. "It's from the garage," she said quickly. "I drove there this morning. I must have—" "Sure," I said. "Grease is a clingy substance, like envy or salesman." She looked like she wanted to slap me, but held back. That was progress. "Leon was working on something dangerous," she whispered. "Something he shouldn't have touched." "Engines can be dangerous," I said, "especially when they try to land on you." "Not that." She hesitated, searching the street as though the buildings might be listening. "It was a prototype, an engine called the Black Ace." "Sounds dramatic." "It was revolutionary," she said. "A design that could give a car acceleration like nothing else on the market. Leon said it was years ahead of racing technology. Someone stole it months ago. Whoever took it threatened him." Now we were getting somewhere dark, illegal, and full of men who thought talk was a personality trait. "Who stole it?" I asked. She crossed her arms, jaw tight. "Vander Chalk." "Well," I said, "there's a name that could make saints reconsider charity." "You know him?" "I've seen his ego reflected in every window on Madison Avenue," I said. "He wanted Wolfe's car once, threw a fit when he couldn't have it. But stealing a prototype seems a bit bold, even for a man who probably shaves while admiring himself from 3 angles. "It was him," she insisted, but her eyes flicked away for a second, tiny but telling. "Evidence?" I asked. Her lips tightened. "Leon said Chalk tried to buy the prototype quietly. When Leon refused, the threats began." "And yet you didn't tell Kramer," I said. "I don't trust the police," she whispered. "They weren't kind to us when my father died." That softened me a bit, but only a bit. "Claudette, if someone dropped a hoist on your brother and left playing cards like ransom notes, this isn't the time to worry about bruised feelings." She gripped the steering wheel again, knuckles white. "I'm telling you because you were there, and because your eyes aren't made of stone." "I moisturize," I said. "It helps." She ignored that. Leon was restoring an engine identical to the stolen prototype. He thought someone wanted to buy the pieces to reconstruct the Black Ace. He swore he'd never be part of something illegal. "And now he's dead," I said softly. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was deciding whether I was trustworthy or just well-dressed. "I need help," she whispered, "but I won't beg." "Good," I said. "I prefer cooperation to groveling. It's less noisy." She exhaled shakily. "If Vander Chalk didn't kill Leon, then someone else did. Someone who wants the Black Ace back." "That's a strong theory," I said. "Almost convincing." "Almost," she snapped. "I said it had structure," I said. "I didn't say it wasn't missing a few bolts." Her shoulders stiffened. "Believe what you want, but stay away from Chalk. He's dangerous." "So am I said. "When underfed." That got me a glare sharp enough to slice fenders. "Get out of my sunshine, Mr. Goodwin," she said. "I have work." "I'll be in touch," I said. "No," she said firmly. I'll contact you." She started the convertible, the engine purring like a big cat that had swallowed an opera singer. I stepped back as she pulled away, the car merging into midtown traffic with a smoothness that would make chauffeurs weep. I headed back to where I'd parked Wolfe's Heron, the cautious distance away from fire hydrants, telegraph poles, and any vehicle resembling public transit. The sun was high, the sidewalk baking like a griddle, and the city hummed with the sound of impatience. That's when I saw it. Pinned under my windshield wiper was a playing card, the 9 of spades, held down by a neat metal clip, as if the devil had decided to leave stationery. The street around me was crowded as always, messengers darting between taxis, women with packages, men in fedoras bargaining with newspaper sellers. No one looked guilty. No one even looked at me. I plucked the card free with 2 fingers, careful not to smudge anything CSU might want later. The spade was glossy black, untouched by grease, clean, deliberate. Someone had been close enough to lean over Wolfe's prized vehicle and leave a calling card without attracting attention. That wasn't just nerve, that was skill. "Wonderful," I muttered. "Spades again. At this rate, I'll have a full deck by Thursday." I slid into the Heron, started the engine, and took a breath. Claudette Renoir had lied to me. Maybe only a little, but lies are like cracks in an engine block. They expand under pressure. Vanda Chalk was now on my list, but I didn't trust her certainty. It felt rehearsed, like someone had fed her the name and she'd swallowed it whole. And someone out there thought I should be collecting spades the way some men collect parking tickets. I steered into traffic, heading back to Wolfe with the card on the seat beside me. One thing was clear. This investigation was accelerating, and I wasn't sure I liked the speed. Some mornings in the brownstone have the pleasant, civilized hush of a monastery. Others feel like the universe is warming up its throwing arm. When I came downstairs the next day, the office had chosen the second option. Light filtered through the shutters in pale stripes, bouncing off Wolfe's orchids in the plant rooms upstairs, and making the dust motes dance like gossip trying to find a home. Wolfe was already at his desk, before 11, which meant something dire had disturbed his schedule. Considering what counts as dire for Wolfe, that included wars, stock market crashes, and me breathing too loudly. He didn't look up as I entered. His eyes were narrowed at the Gazette lying open before him, and the paper quivered in his hands like it regretted provoking him. "Archie," he said, voice clipped, "come." "Good morning to you too," I said. "Coffee? Bacon? Or shall I fetch your dueling pistol?" He ignored the pleasantry and stabbed a finger at the headline. "Private sleuth linked to prototype theft. Automotive racket expands." I whistled. They didn't even bother with subtlety. "Subtlety," Wolfe said with disgust, "is not a commodity the press traffics in." I leaned over his shoulder. The article implied, without the bother of evidence, that Wolfe had been consulted by certain underworld figures about rare engine parts. It mentioned the Renoirs by name, sprinkled in a few anonymous sources, and wound its way towards slandering Wolfe's reputation while trying to sound like investigative journalism. "They're stretching," I said. "Hell, they're doing gymnastics." "Libel," Wolfe growled. "In print. About me." At that exact moment, the phone rang at 9:17. Wolfe's eyebrow twitched, meaning I was to answer it before the second ring. "Nero Wolfe's residence. Goodwin speaking." "Archie, it's Lon," came the familiar hum of our newsroom friend. "Before Wolfe read that article and started plotting my death by ink inhalation, I wanted to warn you." "Too late," I said. "The explosion already happened." Lon sighed. "Look, the Gazette didn't run it. We rejected the piece. But some freelancers sold it to lesser papers. They're pushing this angle that Wolfe's somehow involved in the disappearance of a prototype engine. The Black Ace." "Wolfe involved in anything involving manual labor," I said, "is an accusation so flimsy it should collapse under its own weight." Lon snorted. "I'll print a correction if I can, but you know how it goes. This kind of thing takes on a life of its own in the public imagination." "Fantastic," I muttered. "Anything else?" "Yeah," Lon said. "Saul's been poking around and he wants Wolfe to know he may have stirred a federal hornet's nest." "Federal how?" "The Renoirs were in preliminary talks with the US military. Black Ace Tech might have applications in defense research. If someone stole it, the people involved might not just be collectors or mobsters. They could be agents.""Foreign?" "Possibly." I made a face. Wolfe is going to love this. I'd pay to see his expression, Lon said. Call me if he starts a lawsuit. I want front row seats. We'll send you popcorn, I said, and hung up. Wolfe looked at me expectantly. Well? I sat on the edge of my desk. Rumours, federal shadows, military interest, and journalists hungry enough to print anything that doesn't move. Saul's stirring up ghosts. Wolfe made a noise that might have been a growl or indigestion. I will not have my name entangled with thieves. Too late, I said. Someone tossed your name in the ring. Now we get to untoss it. Pfui. The plant room clock chimed the half hour. Wolfe checked it, then leaned back. If he didn't get to the orchids by 9, Theodore would start rearranging temperatures, and we'd have a different murder on our hands. Archie, he said sharply, you must understand something. The man who wishes you dead is escalating symbolically. Ah, I said, the warm paternal tone of affection. Hit me with it. The next card will be the 8. I put a hand to my chest. Nice to know I'm being hunted alphabetically. Wolfe glared. This is no jest. You will not leave the brownstone unaccompanied until further notice. Boss, I said, I can dodge danger just as well as you can dodge cardio. Archie, Wolfe said, voice pure steel, do not trifle with me. Someone is leaving symbolic markers of homicide. That 9 of spades was intended to intimidate. It may precede a more direct act. I opened my mouth, closed it. Wolfe only pulled the protective older brother routine when he meant it, and as much as I enjoyed riling him, I wasn't about to pretend I hadn't noticed someone got within spitting distance of the heron and me without being seen. All right, I said. For now, I'll behave. Good. Just then, Saul Panzer arrived, quiet as an apology, from the front door. Fritz let him in and vanished like a Swiss ghost. Morning, Saul said. I've stirred up what dust I could, and there's plenty. Wolfe motioned him closer. Saul laid a folder on the desk, slim, precise, filled with typed notes that looked like they'd been aligned with a ruler. Black Ace, Saul said. I dug deeper. The military angle is real. They were evaluating the Renoir's design as a potential basis for high-output engines in armoured vehicles. You mean tanks, I said. Or fast-deploy recon units, Saul said, and someone involved didn't want the Renoirs finishing it. Espionage, Wolfe asked. Not proven, but possible. The prototype vanished, no buyer identified, and someone's hunting the people connected to the pieces. Symbolic cards, I said. A real fan of dramatics. Or signalling to a partner, Saul added. Wolfe closed his eyes, perhaps to gather thoughts, perhaps to keep from swearing in Latin. You are invaluable, Mr. Panzer. Saul nodded and stepped back. One more thing. A rumour. Only that. But someone claimed Renoir did business, briefly, with a man posing as a collector named Spade. No first name. Wolfe's eyes snapped open. Spade? Yes, Saul said. Could be coincidence. It is not, Wolfe declared. Thank you, Saul. Continue. Saul dipped his head, then left as silently as he arrived. I perched on the corner of Wolfe's desk. So someone with espionage ties might be leaving spade cards as a countdown. That's a cheerful thought. Wolfe drummed his fingers. Archie, you will remain indoors today. I raised my hands in mock surrender. I will, at least until after lunch. I'd rather not die on an empty stomach. He gave me a look, equal parts annoyance and reluctant fondness. You are an imbecile, he said softly. That's nice. I'll embroider it. Before Wolfe could fire back, the front bell rang at 11:03. Not a familiar knock, not Kramer's impatient buzz, not a delivery man's double tap. A single polite chime. I frowned. Expecting someone? No, Wolfe said, frowning. Since Fritz doesn't answer doors, the task fell to yours truly. I opened it to find a messenger boy, cap askew, freckles, no sense of impending doom. He held out a sealed envelope. Archie Goodwin, he asked. That's me. Delivery. He shoved it into my hand and darted off before I could ask who sent it. I brought it back to the office. Wolfe watched me like I was carrying nitroglycerin. Open it carefully, he said. Yes, sir, I said with a mock salute. I slit the envelope with a letter opener. Inside were 2 items, a single playing card, a photograph. Wolfe leaned forward. Well? I lifted the card first. The 8 of spades. Someone's punctual, I said, and thematic. Wolfe's nostrils flared. The countdown continues. But it was the photograph that chilled me more than the card. It showed me, standing beside Claudette Renoir's convertible earlier that afternoon. The angle was clean, the exposure perfect, the distance close. "Boss?" I said quietly. "Yes?" Whoever took this was no more than 10 feet from me, and I didn't notice a thing. Wolfe's face darkened, all the warmth drained out. "Archie." His voice wasn't anger, it was fear. I closed the envelope, placed both items on his desk, and forced a grin I didn't quite feel. "Well," I said, "the man has style, I'll give him that." Wolfe didn't answer. The silence felt like the start of a storm. The brownstone at night has a personality all its own, and none of it friendly. The shadows stretch longer, the creaks travel farther, and the whole place settles into a silence so thick you could slice it with Fritz's carving knife. I was typing up notes at 10:11 p.m., the desk lamp throwing a warm pool of light over my keys, when the front bell rang with a short, hard buzz that told me the visitor had no interest in being polite. I didn't need to guess who it was. Only one man in Manhattan rings a bell like he's serving a warrant to the devil. I opened the door and found Inspector Kramer standing there without his overcoat, his cigar stub clamped between his teeth like a declaration of war on tobacco. His jaw was carved out of granite, and his eyes looked even heavier than usual. Behind him, Stebbins lurked in the stairwell light, built like a refrigerator someone had taught to scowl. "Evening, Goodwin," Kramer said. "Tell Wolfe we need a word." That tone meant something serious, too serious for sparring or sarcasm. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They entered without waiting. A gust of cold night air followed them in, swirling around the office doorway where Wolfe sat in his oversized chair, hands steepled, eyes closed. He wasn't asleep, just performing the Wolfian version of lying in ambush. "Inspector," Wolfe said, opening his eyes without lifting his head. "You arrive late, and unannounced. The combination rarely bodes well." Kramer didn't bother sitting. He stood in front of Wolfe's desk like a granite monument, chewing the cigar without lighting it. "You're right. It doesn't bode well." Wolfe's eyebrow lifted a millimeter. "Proceed." Kramer's voice came out low and flat. "Claudette Renoir is dead." The silence was instant and complete. Even the radiator seemed to stop breathing. I felt something twist in my stomach. I had just spoken to her. The woman had grief in her voice and steel in her spine. Now she was gone, erased faster than a chalk mark in the rain. Wolfe sat up straighter. "How?" "Pushed," Kramer said. "Penthouse balcony. 15 stories up." I swallowed. "Hell." Stebbins shifted his weight. "Yeah, and it wasn't no accident." "I presumed as much," Wolfe said. "But why come here?" Kramer reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed evidence envelope. Inside, pressed against the transparent window, was a playing card. The 7 of spades. He handed it to Wolfe, who took it with a grave stillness. "On her body," Kramer said. "Taped under her sleeve." The room felt colder. Wolfe turned the envelope over. "The sequence continues." "You know about that," Kramer said. Not accusing, not angry, just tired. "Yes," Wolfe replied. "The killer is descending the spade sequence. Jack, 10, 9, 8, now 7. I tried for levity because someone had to. I suppose I should be honored I rate an early number." "Archie," Wolfe's voice cracked like a whip. "Enough." That stopped me cold. Wolfe doesn't snap, not at me. Not unless something has slipped past the walls he keeps around his emotions. Kramer watched with something like sympathy. "He's right, Goodwin. This isn't funny. Someone's running a damn sequence. This is organized. Not a jealous boyfriend, not a thief. Someone has a plan." Stebbins grunted. "Maybe your man Panzer knows more than he said." I turned my head sharply. "Saul? Don't be ridiculous." "It's a possibility," Stebbins replied, shrugging thick shoulders. "He's cagey." "Mr. Panzer," Wolfe said icily, "is the most competent operative in this city. He withholds nothing from me." Kramer raised a hand. "Easy. Stebbins is floating possibilities. That's all." "He should float them elsewhere," Wolfe snapped. "Preferably into the river." I stepped closer to Kramer. "How did it happen?" Claudette was careful. Kramer rubbed his temples. Building staff heard a scream around 8:40. By the time they reached the balcony, she was gone. Fell straight into a planter on the terrace 2 floors down. Killed instantly. "Any witnesses?" Wolfe asked. None, Kramer said, but her diary was open on her dressing table. He pulled another piece of evidence from his pocket, this one a typed page sealed under protective plastic. What is that? I asked. A note, Kramer said. Last entry. She wrote something about a buyer her brother mentioned once, someone he refused to work with. Who? Wolfe asked. Kramer tapped the plastic. All it says is, he called himself Spade 1. The words crawled across my skin. Wolfe leaned back, eyes narrowing. The cards, the code name, the escalation. This killer is marking his progress. Toward what? Kramer demanded. The ace, Wolfe said quietly. The objective, the motive item, the prototype engine. I exhaled. The black ace. Yes, Wolfe said. He is descending toward the ace. A countdown. For what? Stebbins asked. To retrieve what he considers rightfully his, Wolfe said, or to eliminate all who touched or obstructed it. Kramer paced, the unlit cigar clamped in his teeth. So what you're telling me is, this isn't a thief, it's a zealot. Or a man acting under orders, Wolfe said. Kramer stopped pacing. I hate that. I dislike it myself, Wolfe murmured, but facts do not bend to preference. I rubbed the back of my neck. Claudette said Chalk stole the prototype, but I didn't buy it. You shouldn't have, Wolfe said. Miss Renoir lied to you, out of fear perhaps or misdirection, but she withheld truth. Kramer sighed. We're chasing shadows and playing cards. That, Wolfe said, is precisely the killer's intent. Stebbins shifted. Inspector, you want us to bring Chalk in? Not yet, Kramer said. No evidence except suspicion and expensive taste. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Inspector, you did not come merely to inform. Kramer hesitated. No, I came because, like it or not, you're in this now. Wolfe exhaled. Phooey, I detest being manipulated. You think we like it? Kramer said. Someone is staging murders like a card trick. And you, he pointed at Wolfe, are the only man in the city who might decode the pattern before someone else falls. That, Wolfe said dryly, is perhaps the first compliment you have ever offered me. Kramer grunted. Don't let it go to your head. Wolfe tapped the 7 of spades envelope. Inspector, you must take steps. People connected to the Renoirs should be considered at risk. We're already doing that, Kramer said. But there's a problem. What problem? I asked. He turned toward me with a look that could sand wood. Goodwin, you were seen with Claudette today. My jaw tightened. And someone took a photograph of you, Kramer said. Found it in her room, like the killer was tracking you both. My pulse ticked faster. Wolfe's chair creaked ominously. Inspector, I insist you provide Mr. Goodwin with protective detail. Kramer shook his head. Not yet. It'll spook the killer. And Goodwin moves too much for a tale to matter. Wolfe's growl was low. Archie will not be imperiled due to bureaucratic timidity. It's not timidity, Kramer snapped. It's strategy. And I'm telling you now so you don't get blindsided. Wolfe's face shifted. Not anger, not indignation, but something rarer. Fear. He masked it quickly. Very well. What else? Kramer sighed heavily. Look, I still don't like your methods, but this time, we're on the same side. He extended a hand, palm open, a gesture so out of character it practically rewrote physics. Wolfe, I'll share everything we find. You do the same. Wolfe stared at the offered hand for a long moment, then placed his own in it. A brief shake, a fragile alliance. Stebbins muttered, Well, now I've seen everything. Kramer pulled back. All right. I've delivered the news. Now I have to get back before the press finds out and turns her death into a circus. He paused at the doorway. Wolfe, Goodwin, watch yourselves. Wolfe inclined his head. And you, Inspector? Kramer nodded once, then left with Stebbins lumbering behind him. The door clicked shut, and the brownstone exhaled. I stood there, hands in my pockets, trying to shake off the cold shock that clung to me like fog. Wolfe looked at the 7 of spades again, his face carved in stone. Archie, he said softly, we must be exceedingly cautious. Sure, I said, though my voice wasn't steady. But look on the bright side. He glared. What bright side? At this rate, I said, I'll have a full deck by the weekend. Wolfe didn't smile. He just closed his eyes. and the room felt colder still. It took an hour of arguing before Wolfe would even consider letting me leave the brownstone. In the end, he agreed, on the strict condition that I go with Saul and Fred, follow their lead, and come straight back the moment the job was done. If Manhattan has a heartbeat, it's after dark, when the neon signs flicker like nervous eyelids and the pavement sweats secrets. By the time Saul and I hit the west side that night, the streets had the sort of gleam that suggests either rain or regret. Cars whispered past in low growls, storefronts glowed in sickly colours, and alleyways held their breath. It was the perfect setting to go looking for a man who liked sending playing cards with homicide for postage. Saul Panzer walked beside me with his usual quiet stride, hands tucked in the pockets of a nondescript coat that made him look like someone who had never once experienced danger. I knew better. Saul was the kind of man who could walk through a war zone without getting dust on his shoes. Behind us lumbered Fred Durkin, whose presence always made me feel oddly comforted. Nothing bad can sneak up on you when a man shaped like an armoured truck is covering your rear. "Sure this is the place?" I murmured as we approached a warehouse that had definitely seen better decades. Saul nodded once. Lead said southeast corner basement, private auction, password at the door. "Password?" I asked. "Do we at least get capes to go with this ridiculous setup?" Fred rumbled. "I don't do capes." "I'd pay money to see you in one," I said. "Preferably leopard print." Saul allowed himself the hint of a smile. "Behave, Archie." We turned down a narrow alley lit by a single flickering bulb. A steel door waited at the end, guarded by a man with shoulders so wide he could have doubled as a blockade. He held a clipboard, which he studied like it contained instructions for detonating the moon. "What?" he grunted. "Do you want?" Saul stepped forward. "We're here for the bidding. Black Throttle sent us." That was apparently the correct password, because the human blockade stepped aside without a word. He pulled the door open, and the smell of oil, smoke, and unwashed ambition drifted up to greet us. Inside, the basement opened into a cavernous room, lit with bare industrial lamps suspended on long cords. The lights swayed with the air currents, making shadows stretch and shrink like they were breathing. Crates of engine parts lined the walls, some stamped with brand names, others unmarked. Never a good sign. Men and women huddled around displays like hungry gamblers sizing up blackjack tables. "Welcome," a voice announced over a cheap loudspeaker, "to tonight's private sale. Bidders, take your places." Saul elbowed me slightly, eyes open. "As opposed to what?" I said. "Blindfolded?" He didn't dignify that. We wove through the crowd. Rare engines sat on velvet-draped tables, the kind of mechanical beauties that made collectors whisper and thieves drool. Carburetors the size of my head gleamed under brownish lights, side by side with suspension systems, blueprint scrolls, and an item that looked suspiciously like it belonged in the Smithsonian. "How does this place not get raided?" I asked. "Bribes," Fred muttered. "Big ones." "Hope they kept the receipt," I said, "because this whole setup belongs in a museum of bad decisions." That's when the lights dimmed. A murmur rippled across the crowd like wind through dry grass. A figure stepped onto a small platform at the far end of the room. A man wearing a black half-mask. The mask was simple, cloth, tied behind the head, covering the upper face. But what made it distinctive was the symbol painted across it. A spade, white, crisp, unmistakable. Saul leaned in. "Jack of spades." I nodded slowly, feeling something settle in my spine. So it's not just symbolism. He's real. The man raised his hands. "Tonight's auction begins with item 1, a restored Alfa Romeo engine block, 1938 origin." His voice was smooth, practiced, a salesman who understood both charm and menace. As he continued, the bidders leaned forward like moths courting a flame. Then I saw him, Vander Chalk, standing near a carburetor display with a bored expression and a too-expensive suit. The man had all the subtlety of a parade float. If he was trying to stay invisible, he should have chosen a place that didn't contain polished chrome. "Well," I whispered, "there's our favourite red herring." Fred narrowed his eyes. "You think he's the Jack?" "No," I said. "That man couldn't organise his socks without 3 assistants. But he's definitely not here for the appetizers." Saul murmured, "Eyes on the masked one." The auctioneer continued, presenting item after item, engines, designs, stolen blueprints, all the things sane mechanics dream of and criminals kill for. As he lifted the next sheet, he paused. Item 9, a partial schematic from an experimental acceleration engine, unverified, undated. Bidding begins at... The Black Ace, Saul breathed. The crowd surged, voices rose, hands shot up with numbers attached. The air thickened with desperation. I scanned the room and saw the masked man's eyes flick toward the exit. Just once, but enough for me to know something was about to happen. "Saul," I said quietly. "He's leaving." Fred tensed. "You want to tail him?" "I want to talk to him," I said, "preferably in a well-lit, non-collapsing environment." Saul nodded. "Let's move." We slipped through the crowd as the bidding reached fever pitch. The masked man stepped off the platform and strode toward a side door. Saul moved like water, Fred like a silent tank. I followed. The side door swung shut behind him. I grabbed the handle. It wasn't locked. I pushed it open. We entered a narrow corridor stacked with crates. The masked man was already halfway down it. "Hey," I called. "Jack, deal me in." He didn't turn, but he did run. We followed. The corridor opened into a loading area with a raised platform lined with pulleys. As we stepped inside, a chain groaned overhead, loud, dangerous. I looked up. An engine block the size of a small elephant was hanging from a crane hook, which was fine, except that it was also swinging, directly toward me. "Archie!" Saul shouted. I dove sideways as the block whooshed past, smashing into a stack of crates with an explosion of splinters. I hit the floor, rolled, and hissed as something sharp nicked my shoulder. "That," I muttered, "could have ended my dancing career." "That's assuming you had one," Saul said dryly as he grabbed my arm and hauled me up. Fred barreled past us. "He's getting away!" The masked man dashed through another door leading to an exterior ramp. Saul took off after him. Fred followed. I stumbled upright, caught my balance, and ran. By the time we burst onto the loading ramp, the masked man was vaulting over a fence into an alley. Saul sprinted. Fred lunged. I brought up the rear, cursing the fact that Wolfe had strongly discouraged my gym attendance on the grounds that a man must not confuse exercise with vocation. We rounded a corner, and he was gone. Completely vanished. The alley was empty except for trash cans, shadows, and a cat who looked offended by our presence. Saul checked the ground. He squeezed through fast. Too fast. "Damn," Fred muttered. "We had him." "Almost," I said. Saul crouched near something glinting on the ground. "What's this?" He lifted a small metal object, a key fob, heavy, engraved. The shape, a spade, etched deep and clean. "Well," I said, "if he wanted us to follow breadcrumbs, he's doing an excellent job." Saul turned the fob in his hand. "There's an emblem here. Garage crest, Midtown, luxury building." Fred whistled. "So, he has money." "Or access to money," I said, "which narrows nothing." Saul pocketed the fob. "We should go. Auction's going to collapse once they realize we chased the host." "Speaking of collapse," I said, rubbing my shoulder, "does anyone know who I talked to about filing a workplace hazard complaint regarding falling engine blocks?" Saul gave me a flat look. "Archie, you can file it from the hospital if you don't start listening." I grinned. "You do care." Fred shook his head. "Let's get back before Wolfe starts pacing." "The day Wolfe paces," I said, "is the day Manhattan breaks off and floats into the sea." We headed toward the streetlights, each step pulling us away from the warehouse and the man in the mask, a man who had just stepped fully into view, only to vanish like smoke. But he left behind one thing: a key, a symbol, a warning, and if Wolfe hated anything more than being manipulated, it was being taunted. I had the sinking feeling our killer knew that quite well. Storms in Manhattan have a way of making the brownstone feel like a ship riding out a siege. The wind rattles the shutters, the rain slants sideways, and the whole place creaks like it's bracing for impact. By late evening, the sky had turned a furious slate grey, and lightning lit the office in sharp, surgical flashes. Wolfe doesn't flinch at thunderstorms, but even he looked mildly inconvenienced by the noise, which for Wolfe is the emotional equivalent of screaming. I sat at my desk typing reports, while Wolfe occupied his throne behind the desk, immobilized in his chair like a mountain considering whether to avalanche. Papers were spread across the blotter in a meticulous pattern only he understood. He'd been silent for 20 minutes, which is how long it takes him to line up thoughts like soldiers preparing for inspection. At 9:44 p.m., he finally spoke. "Archie." I stopped typing. "Yes?" "The pattern is no longer merely symbolic." "Well," I said, glancing at the stack of spades we'd collected, "unless someone is planning a card game with unusually high stakes, I'd guessed that." He gave me a look so arched it could have been used in cathedral construction. "Attend. The killer is not simply descending numerically. He is descending according to contact." "Contact with what?" "The prototype," Wolfe said. "The Black Ace engine. Those murdered, Leon Renoir, Claudette, handled it directly. They touched it, repaired it, negotiated its fate. Their positions correspond with the Jack 10, 9, and 7. "And me?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "You photographed it," Wolfe said bluntly. "You examined it, you discussed it, and the killer, evidently, has placed you in his sequence." "That's flattering," I said. "Morbidly flattering, but flattering." "Archie," Wolfe's tone snapped like a ruler on knuckles, "this is not a matter for jest. The next card will be the 6. "And after that?" I asked lightly, though my stomach had started performing gymnastics. 5, 4, 3, he paused. Then the ace. The storm growled outside, matching the mood. I stood and crossed the room to refill my coffee. Well, at least he's organized. If he starts sending me appointment cards, I'll be sure to schedule him between lunch and Fritz's dessert. "Archie," Wolfe's voice rose, more than it typically does before orchid hours. "Come here." I turned. His face held no irritation, no bluster, only a tightness around the eyes I'd seen maybe 3 times in 10 years. I crossed the room slowly. "You will remain within my sight until further notice," he said. I blinked. "Your sight? As in, no errands, no investigation, no stepping out for ginger ale?" "As in," Wolfe said sharply, "you will not leave my line of vision unless I explicitly order it. The killer is escalating. I will not have you snatched, shot, strangled, or blown to smithereens because you insist upon gadabout impulses." "Well," I said, "if that isn't the closest thing to affection you've ever expressed, I'll eat my hat." I paused. "If I owned a hat." He growled, "Do not provoke me." "I'm not," I said, and softened my voice. "I get it, Wolfe. Really." He looked away, muttering something in what sounded like German, probably a curse relating to my intelligence. Before I could tease him again, the elevator clattered softly upstairs, and Theodore Horstman poked his head in. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "the humidity gauge in the south plant room is malfunctioning. If it persists, it may affect the odontoglossums." "That," Wolfe said darkly, "would be intolerable." "I'll adjust the vents manually." Wolfe nodded. Theodore retreated, his footsteps fading. Not 60 seconds later, Fritz appeared at the doorway, holding a polished silver tray. "Dinner?" "Gentlemen," he announced gently. Roast pheasant, garlic potatoes, and a sauce that smelled like heaven had loaned Fritz a recipe. Wolfe refused to leave the office, so Fritz set the tray on a side table, bowed, and departed like the culinary ghost he is. Wolfe gestured irritably. "Eat." "Yes, sir," I said, because only a fool argues with Fritz's food. I lifted my fork, but the front bell rang at 9:58 p.m. Wolfe stiffened. "I'll get it," I said cautiously. He nodded, but his eyes followed me like a man tracking a bomb he knows is ticking. I cracked the door open halfway and saw a delivery man standing on the stoop, hunched against the rain. He held a wooden crate, small, square, sealed with twine. A shipping label was nailed to the top. "For Mr. Goodwin," he said. My skin prickled. "From who?" He shrugged. "Didn't say." I took the crate carefully. It wasn't heavy, but something about it felt wrong. Too balanced, too deliberate. The delivery man hurried down the steps and disappeared into the downpour before I could question him. I shut the door. Wolfe's voice rolled from the office. "What is that?" "A gift," I said, carrying it in. "Addressed to me. I suspect it's not chocolate." Wolfe glared. "Put it on the table." I set it down. That's when I saw it. Taped to the top, half hidden under the label, The 6 of spades. My heartbeat stuttered. Wolfe. I see it, he said tightly. I leaned closer, just to check the label, and noticed something else. A thin metal wire threading through one crack of the crate. Back, I snapped. There's a wire. Wolfe surged from his chair, an act so rare it might have caused thunder to applaud. Archie! His voice boomed with something I'd never heard in it before. Panic. Do not touch it. I wasn't planning on juggling it, I said, stepping back quickly. Wolfe's face had gone pale beneath his usual stonework expression. That crate may contain an explosive device. Lovely, I said. This killer has range. Stand away from it, Wolfe ordered, raising his voice in a way that could have commanded armies. I obeyed. Wolfe moved toward the bell cord and yanked it sharply, summoning Fritz, but then thought better of it and barked, No, not Fritz, Theodore. The elevator whirred overhead. I didn't dare breathe. Wolfe pointed toward the hall. Archie, we must remove the crate to a contained space. Such as? The elevator shaft. It is sealed on all sides and reinforced. I blinked. You want me to throw a bomb down your elevator? I want it lowered carefully, Wolfe snapped. But yes. Before I could argue, Theodore hurried in. Yes, Mr. Wolfe. Help Mr. Goodwin move that crate to the elevator, Wolfe commanded. Carefully. Do not jostle it. Theodore paled but nodded. Together he and I gingerly lifted the crate. Every second felt like balancing a lit match atop a keg of dynamite. We shuffled to the elevator, opened its gate, and set the crate inside. Lower it, Wolfe said from the office doorway. I pulled the lever. The elevator descended slowly, the crate sitting in the center like a deadly centerpiece. When it reached the bottom, Wolfe exhaled a breath he'd been holding so long I thought he might faint. Close the gate, Wolfe said, and leave it. I shut the gate. The office felt like it had aged 10 years in 5 minutes. Wolfe turned away from the hall and braced one hand on his desk. Archie, are you hurt? No, I said quietly, just rattled. He closed his eyes briefly, long enough that I knew he was mastering himself by force. Good. I cracked a grin to lighten the air. You know, if you wanted me to stay indoors, you could have just said so without the theatrics. Wolfe glared. Archie Goodwin, if you ever jest again about being murdered under my roof. Okay, I said quickly. Truce. He harumphed and pointed at the shipping label I'd peeled from the crate before we moved it. Read it. The label was smeared with rain, but the return address was clear. Raman Kessel, Midtown Towers private garage. I whistled. Kessel, the financier, likes investing in tech nobody else wants to touch. Indeed, Wolfe said, and evidently associates himself with those who prefer threats to arguments. So, he's our next stop, I asked. He is our next summons, Wolfe corrected. I raised an eyebrow. Summons? You're pulling the big guns this early. He sat down heavily, folding his hands. This killer is accelerating. He is escalating, and he has now targeted you within my domain. Wolfe's voice lowered to a rumble. Enough. It is time I pulled the phantom into the light. I grinned. Shall I prepare the office for company? Yes, Wolfe said, tomorrow at 8 o'clock. The storm outside boomed like a drumline, and the countdown continued. At 8 o'clock sharp, the Brownstones' office looked like a courtroom that had grown out of the floorboards overnight. The lamps glowed low and golden. The curtains were half drawn against the street. Wolfe sat behind his desk, like a judge presiding over a trial he hadn't asked for, but intended to dominate. Outside, the last remnants of the storm smeared the windows with streaks of reflected neon, giving the room a tense underwater shimmer. Inside, the air was tight enough to snap. I stood to Wolfe's right, not seated, because Wolfe wanted me visible, upright, and breathing. Kramer and Stebbins occupied the red chairs, both looking like men who had been pried from their precinct desks under protest. Saul Panzer lingered near the wall, hat in hand, silent but ready. Vander Chalk stood near the door with an expression that suggested he'd stumbled into a luncheon he'd RSVP'd no to. 2 mechanics from the Renoir garage shifted awkwardly on their feet, and at the centre of it all, perched stiffly on the edge of one of Wolfe's guest chairs, sat Raman Kessel, the financier, the investor, and, if Wolfe's theory was right, the mastermind hiding behind too many shadows. Wolfe cleared his throat. That alone was enough to hush the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you have been summoned because a man has used your names, your reputations, and your proximity to a stolen prototype engine as stepping stones in a sequence of murder." He placed one massive hand on the stack of playing cards laid before him like evidence in a magician's act. "Jack, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Kessel forced a laugh, quick and brittle. "This is absurd." Wolfe fixed him with a stare that could have stripped bark from a tree. "Mr. Kessel, I will ask you to refrain from commentary until I conclude." Kramer grunted. "I'd take that advice." The financier pressed his lips together. Wolfe continued. "The Renoir brothers constructed a prototype engine, rumoured as the Black Ace, an engine whose unusually high acceleration properties made it attractive not only to collectors, but also to those with military ambitions." He leaned back. "Contracts worth millions, if properly weaponized." Chalk's eyebrows flew up. "Weaponized? For racing engines?" "Do you imagine," Wolfe asked dryly, "that the military court's innovation for Sunday amusement? No, they saw potential, and someone among us saw profit." Kessel's jaw tightened. Wolfe went on. "Leon Renoir refused to sell to an anonymous buyer operating under the codename Spade 1. This individual, offended, thwarted, and unwilling to reveal himself, stole the prototype. Leon discovered the theft. He phoned my office, terrified, because he had inadvertently learned the identity of the thief." Saul stepped forward and placed the metal spade-etched key fob on the desk beside Wolfe's cards. It gleamed with the cool arrogance of a calling card. Wolfe tapped it. This was dropped by the masked man at the illicit auction, an auction conducted under the persona Jack of Spades, a figure who, witnesses confirm, has orchestrated black market engine sales for months. That masked man was our killer's operative. Wolfe turned his gaze to Kessel. But the true Jack of Spades, the architect, did not wear a mask. Kessel let out a breath through his nose. "If you're implying—" "I am not implying," Wolfe said curtly. "I am stating." Kramer folded his arms. "Let him finish." Wolfe gestured to me. I placed Claudette Renoir's diary page on the desk. "Claudette discovered the truth," Wolfe said. "She threatened exposure. She was killed for it. The 7 of Spades was placed upon her as both signature and reminder, a message to all who had touched the prototype." The mechanics exchanged alarmed looks. "Kessel," Wolfe continued, "handled the engine last. He negotiated the prospective sale to the military, but he needed one thing before securing his contract: uninterrupted control of the prototype, and that required eliminating anyone who could testify to its origins or its fraudulence." Kessel's face flushed. "You have no evidence." Wolfe reached into his drawer and pulled out a sheet of paper sealed in plastic. "Fingerprints," he said. "Recovered from the crate delivered to this house. The bomb intended for Mr. Goodwin." My stomach clenched. Wolfe's voice had cooled several degrees. "Your fingerprints, Mr. Kessel." Kessel shook his head sharply. "You're fabricating. You want headlines. You want bragging rights." Kramer rose halfway from his seat. "Sit down." "No." Kessel pushed up from his chair, eyes flaring. "I won't be part of this circus." Wolfe's chin lifted. "You misapprehend, sir. You are not part of a circus. You are the ringmaster." "You can't prove—" "I can." Wolfe pointed one thick finger at him. "The diary entry naming Spade 1, the key fob tied directly to your Midtown private garage, the fingerprints on the crate, the masked auctioneer's escape route leading into your property's underground service tunnel, and finally, your motive. You stood to gain millions if the prototype were reclaimed and delivered quietly, but the Renoir became impediments, as did anyone who knew too much." Kessel's breath came fast and sharp. Stebbins rose from his seat. "Inspector?" But before Kramer could respond, something in Kessel snapped. His hand flew inside his coat. My body moved before my brain gave permission. I lunged sideways, reaching instinctively to grab his wrist, but the gun was already out, already rising, already pointed squarely at Wolfe. "Wolfe!" I shouted. The gun went off. The sound cracked through the office like thunder trapped in a bottle. Pain sliced across my arm, a burning shock that jerked me backward. I hit the floor, clutching my upper arm as warmth spread beneath my fingers. Wolfe roared, not spoke, not barked, roared my name. "Archie!" I'd never heard him sound like that. Not once. Not in a decade of guns, knives, poison, falls, fists, and near misses. His chair scraped violently as he half rose, an instinctive motion so uncharacteristic it stunned the room. In the same instant, Stebbins launched himself like a charging bull. He slammed into Kessel, tackling him against Wolfe's desk. The gun clattered across the carpet. Chalk yelped. The mechanics jumped aside. Saul moved to shield Wolfe automatically. Kramer sprinted past me, bellowing, "Get his other arm! Stebbins, hold him down!" Kessel thrashed like a man drowning in his own panic. Stebbins twisted his wrist until the financier screamed. Kramer rammed a knee into his back and snapped handcuffs around his wrists in one swift motion. The chaos evaporated almost instantly. The room froze. Stebbins hauled Kessel upright. Kramer gripped his shoulder, panting slightly. "You're done, Kessel." The financier spat blood onto the carpet. "You don't know what you're interfering with." "Oh, I know," Kramer growled. "A multi-million-dollar greed racket with a body count. And you're the man behind the ace in this deck." Wolfe didn't respond. He was already striding, yes, striding, toward me. "Archie." "I'm fine," I said, though the room wobbled alarmingly and my arm felt like someone had lit a match inside it. "Just a graze." "Your definition of fine is defective," Wolfe said. "Sit." He lowered me onto the red chair Kramer had vacated. Fritz, hearing the gunshot from the hall, arrived breathlessly, saw the blood, and fled wordlessly for medical supplies. Wolfe stood over me like a stone guardian. His expression wasn't rage or fear anymore. It was something heavier, something tight, something dangerously close to grief. Saul crouched beside me. "Bullet grazed the muscle. You'll live." "I wasn't worried," I said lightly. "Wolfe wouldn't let me die. He'd never find another secretary with my charm." Wolfe made a sound halfway between a snort and a curse. Across the room, Kramer straightened, wiped sweat from his brow, and exhaled hard. "Hell of a job," he said to Wolfe. Not sarcastic, not grudging, just respectful. Wolfe inclined his head once, a king acknowledging another general. "Inspector!" Stebbins dragged Kessel toward the door. Chalk looked ready to faint. The mechanics looked ready to flee to another state. Saul stood with arms folded, watchful as always. Kramer paused before leaving. "We'll need full statements, but—" He glanced at Wolfe again. "You nailed him." Wolfe said nothing. He only looked at me, and for once that was enough. By the following morning, Manhattan had wrung the last stormwater out of its gutters and decided to behave like a civilized city again. Sunlight slanted through the brownstone shutters in gentle, gold-tipped stripes, making the office look less like a battlefield and more like a place where human beings might reasonably discuss life, liberty, and the pursuit of breakfast. I sat at my desk in a clean shirt, the one without blood on it, and tried flexing my bandaged arm without wincing. I failed, but I did it with style. Wolfe sat behind his desk in full morning regalia, yellow silk house robe, immaculate shirt, and a scowl so well pressed it could have come with pleats. Kramer had dropped off one final souvenir from Kessel's pockets before heading back downtown, the ace of spades. It lay in the center of Wolfe's blotter like a warrant served by fate, a white card, crisp and final, the last piece of a sequence that had almost landed me in the morgue. Fritz entered right on time, 9:02 a.m., bearing a breakfast tray that looked like a love letter to the concept of calories. Eggs baked in cream, country ham, buttered toast, honey, and a pot of coffee that smelled like someone had coaxed ambrosia out of South American soil. Fritz set the tray on the side table, bowed, and disappeared with the efficiency of a magician avoiding applause. "Your breakfast, Archie," Wolfe said, nodding at the tray. "It looks great," I said. "Though if this is the treatment for nearly getting killed, maybe I'll stick to milk today." Wolfe's head jerked up like I'd threatened to insult the orchids. "Phooey! Spare me theatrics. Drink your coffee." "Yes, sir," I said obediently, pouring myself a cup. "But for the record, milk has its virtues." "I am aware you believe that," Wolfe said dryly. "Your habits do not require reinforcement." I sipped the coffee and sighed contentedly. "I'll log that under Boss thinks I'm a hopeless case." "You may log it under Boss expects you to value your life." He shifted slightly in his chair. "Your behavior last night was reckless." "You mean diving in front of the bullet?" I mean your refusal to wait for instruction, Wolfe snapped. Your impulsiveness nearly cost you your life, and with it, mine. That stopped me. Yours? Wolfe's gaze met mine, steady and blunt. If you had died under my roof, I would have been responsible. Do not dismiss my meaning. Something did a somersault in my chest. I covered it with a wisecrack. Well, I'm not planning to die anywhere, let alone under your roof. The carpets are too nice. Wolfe harumphed and reached for his coffee. I dug into breakfast, letting the silence settle. It wasn't uncomfortable, just reflective. The way morning silence feels when you've survived something loud and lethal the night before. So, I said eventually, the ace. Wolfe nodded at the card. The ace represents the engine itself, the black ace, the object of desire, the focal point for greed, ambition and violence. He sipped. But in practical terms, it now resides in police evidence. Inspector Kramer assured me of that this morning. So, the killer's deck is complete, I said. Yes, the countdown ended with Mr. Kessel's arrest. He will not see daylight for many years. Good, I said. He's the kind of man who'd paint numbers on the steps of the gallows just to make the executioner nervous. Wolfe gave me a sharp glance. Your metaphors are increasingly lurid. It's the influence of working for you, I said, buttering toast. You bring out the poetry in people. Archie, do not provoke me before breakfast. You already had breakfast, I pointed out. Do not provoke me after breakfast either. I grinned and leaned back. My arm twinged, but at least the room stayed in one piece around me. What happens now? I asked. Now, Wolfe said, order is restored. Kramer will file his reports. Stebbins will preen over the arrest. Mr. Pantzer will return to his usual routine. And I, he tapped the card once, will consign this nonsense to the completed ledger. You make it sound so quaint, I said. A few murders, a bomb, a close-range shooting, espionage. Just a little ledger. It is not quaint, Wolfe snapped. It is offensive. Murder is always offensive. That tone meant he was warming into one of his morning lectures. I settled in and tore off a piece of ham. Wolfe continued, this case exemplifies the destructive convergence of avarice and ambition. Men who crave speed, power, and prestige often delude themselves into believing those cravings justify any means. That's cars for you, I said with a shrug. People get behind the wheel and think they're immortal. Give them an engine that breaks laws of physics, and they start breaking laws of the land. Wolfe's eyebrow twitched. You refer to Mr. Kessel? To everyone, I said. Leon tried to protect his work, Claudette tried to protect her brother, and Kessel wanted to protect his bank balance. The prototype made angels out of some and devils out of others. Wolfe drank his coffee. You are waxing philosophical. It's the morphine talking, I said. You didn't receive morphine. Well, I said, then it's the coffee. Wolfe gave a small, almost invisible smile. Archie. Yes. You did well. I blinked. Wolfe compliments are rarer than snowstorms in July. Thank you. You also nearly died. And thank you for saving my life, I said simply. Wolfe looked away. Phooey. He set down his cup with a decisive clink and reached for the newspaper. Now, to conclude, the ace is accounted for, the deck assembled, and the killer neutralized. The matter is closed. Just like that? Yes. He opened the paper to the front page. There will be articles. Kramer will ensure our names are omitted. Lon Cohen will provide context. The Gazette will correct the earlier insinuations. And the engine? Seized by the police, likely destined for a military vault where it will gather dust, as all dangerous inventions should. Wolfe, I said, you realize you just implied you trust the government with a powerful experimental engine. I trust, Wolfe said calmly, that bureaucratic inertia will prevent anyone from doing anything hasty with it. That's fair, I admitted. I finished the last of the ham. Fritz's cooking always made me feel like the world, no matter how murderous, still had redeeming features. Wolfe turned a page. How is your arm? Sore, I said. Theo wrapped it like it was a Ming vase. Good. Good that it's sore? Good that you're still here to feel it. Well, I said, if you start talking like that, I might just switch to milk after all. That is your second mention, Wolfe said sternly. Do not exceed quota. Yes, sir. I walked back to my desk, feeling the quiet in my bones. The storm had blown itself out, the case had wound to a close, and Wolfe, Infuriating, brilliant, immovable Wolfe had done what he always did, anchored the world before it fell off its axis. He glanced up from the paper. Archie. Yeah? Do not, under any circumstances, engage in further investigation regarding automobiles for at least 1 month. Can I drive one? Only if you intend to go to the store for Fritz. So no, I said. Wolfe grunted approval. I sank into my chair. The morning light warmed my bandaged arm and made the office glow like a sepia photograph. A good ending, hard-earned, fragile. As I typed the first lines of the final report, I let myself drift into one of those rare reflective moods that Wolfe pretends to dislike but secretly tolerates. Engines. Men build them to go faster, louder, farther, to outrun their problems or each other, to make themselves feel invincible. But the faster an engine runs, the closer it edges towards self-destruction. Maybe that's true of men too. Maybe the Black Ace wasn't cursed. Maybe it just showed people who they already were. Some chased it for glory, others for greed, one for blood. And Wolfe? Wolfe wanted none of it. He'd rather grow orchids. They don't roar or explode or tempt men to kill. They bloom in their own time, under steady hands and patient care. Not ambition, not acceleration, just growth. I suppose that's why we work well together. Wolfe anchors, I chase. He thinks, I stir up trouble. He stays in the brownstone. I bring the world to his doorstep, even the deadly parts. But at the end of the day, the ace is on the table. The engine's locked away, the cards are done, and I'm still here, drinking coffee while Wolfe grumbles about headlines. For a detective, that's as close to peace as you get.